Okay, so now let's get to this final king, Tarquinius Superbus. His accession to power is already a matter of great trouble because it basically occurs as a result of the very public and quite graphic assassination of the prior king, Servius Tullius, that is instigated by Tarquin's wife, Tanaquil. And we bear in mind, too, that one thing that was never settled through the accession of these Etruscan kings were those two sons of Ancus Marcius, who were trying to get their own position as kingship established, and in fact were never successful in doing so. All right, so now, what goes on with Tarquinius Superbus? He's a pretty violent-minded king. Curiously, as far as his actual rule goes, despite his violent temper and violent manner, there are not too many specific negative points mentioned to him as goes as a ruler. But it is pretty clear that he had quite an oppressive power hold on his subjects and was obviously quite disliked for that. But what brings him down and what he becomes best known for is the horrendous incident that occurs with his son Sextus Tarquinius. It's worth mentioning that this incident is called the Rape of Lucretia, and you should pay attention to this incident in comparison to the rape of the Sabines, which is treated positively by the same author Livy with regard to Romulus, the first king. There's a discussion question that relates to that, and you might to take note of the different standards that appear to be in place with regard to these two different rapes. Okay, so now, our Tarquinius Superbus. The story goes that Sextus Tarquinius, his son, was serving on campaign with one of the generals whose name was Collatinus. Collatinus was married to this renowned chaste woman named Lucretia. Now, there was an argument came up one night during the campaign between several of the generals about who had the most chaste wife. And Collatinus insisted that he had the most chaste wife, and so he promised all of the men listening, including Sextus, that they would be invited to his house to come and meet Lucretia once that campaign was finished. So, sometime later, all of them came to his house. They all got to meet Lucretia, and indeed, she had been serving as the proper domestic matron all the time that Collatinus was away, and so it appeared that Collatinus was going to win the bet. Well, it was too bad that Sextus happened to go, because when he arrived and laid eyes on Lucretia, his first reaction was lust. Sometime after that, in an act that echoes Paris's ambassadorship to Sparta, where he gets into the house of Menelaus and is able to kidnap his wife Helen. That's what starts the Trojan War. In an act that echoes all of that, we have Sextus, who again is serving as an ambassador, and he ends up staying at the house of Collatinus. This is arranged. And at night, he slips out of bed and sneaks over to Lucretia's room, breaks into it, and wakes her up and holds her at knife point. She is forced to submit, and the next morning she confesses to her husband and her father what has happened. She absolutely cannot live with the shame, and she commits suicide. This is such a horrifying act that it inflames Collatinus into a fury of anger, and at this point he resolves to overthrow the kingship. Collatinus, despite the tragedy he has just suffered, is very fortunate, because it happens that in this in a family that is in conflict with the Tarquin family is included this man Brutus, Lucius Junius Brutus. Now, this Brutus is the ancestor of the Marcus Junius Brutus that you know of as the assassin of Julius Caesar in 44 BC. Well, this Brutus was essentially pretending to be a rather silly type, someone who, just like his name Brutus suggests, somebody who couldn't stand properly. He falls and he talks crazily and so forth. He was actually hiding his real strong sense of mind, and hiding the fact that he in fact was destined to become a ruler of Rome. So he emerges at this point to help Collatinus, and the two of them together team up to organize a rebellion against Tarquinius Superbus and Sextus Tarquinius, and the rebellion is successful, and Tarquinius is forced into exile. Thereafter, the kingship is suspended and will be replaced, in this version, permanently by the republic that begins in 509 BC with the advent of the consuls. And the first accession to the positions of consuls fall to these two men, Collatinus and Brutus. It's a very neat, tidy story. It, however, has some difficulties with it, because there is outside evidence to suggest that this man who does actually show up in Livy's story later, Lars Porsena, was actually a king of Rome at one point, and that's part's ignored. Also, other stories suggest that Tarquin Superbus might very well have gotten back into the kingship also for a period. So all of this floats around. But the official story is that this is the end of the 7th kingship in Rome, and thereafter the permanent end of kingship in Rome for good. Thereafter, it does become quite clear in later Roman writings that there did come a point when the Romans insisted that they never again be ruled by a king, rex in Latin, which became a very bad word. So much so that Julius Caesar is supposed to have said, "My name is Caesar, not Rex," at one point. And also, of course, in Julius Caesar, the play by Shakespeare, you have the depiction of the story of how Mark Antony tried 3 times to offer a crown to Julius Caesar, which would have made him king, and he refused that crown, but with apparent increasing reluctance each time. And apparently, that was one of the worrisome signs that he might have been trying to become permanent full ruler of Rome that may have inspired the senators to conspire against him in 44 BC. So kingship, after this, let's say, experiment at it, was eventually, if not actually formally, certainly in practice, abolished in Rome. And through the whole period of the Republic and afterwards the Empire, there was never again any thought whatsoever of trying to establish a kingship that was ever taken seriously because of this unfortunate incident that happened, and of the Romans of full distrust of having power unchecked with one leader. One curious point to finally mention that is relevant for Virgil, whose works we'll be reading in a few sessions, has to do with Virgil's work Georgics. In his 4th book of the 4-book epic Georgics, Virgil describes beekeeping. The entire work as a whole is about farming, different kinds of farming in general, but also makes political commentary on the way. When Virgil gets to beekeeping in his 4th book, he curiously describes one of the bees, the head bee, as a king bee, rex. And it's curious to see Virgil use that term rex, because Virgil was a farmer and would have been aware that the head bee in a hive is a queen bee. But he is very particular about choosing rex as the king bee, probably politically making commentary about the potential position of rex in Rome. And there are a couple of very important similes in Virgil's Aeneid involving bees that are tied in with foreign invasion and a swarm of the mob and the overthrow of the government into power. All of that in different places in Virgil's Aeneid gets specifically associated with bees and the kind of power structure that bees have. So the mention of rex in that rather strange context, where you would have expected something quite different there, is quite remarkable, and probably does tie in again with this general negative reputation that kingship had in Rome. Okay, so with that, we conclude this particular topic on Livy and early Roman history, and we'll be moving on very soon to videos related to your next author, Ovid, his very entertaining work called Heroides, and thereafter we'll be moving on to the really big work of this course, and that's Virgil's Aeneid. Okay, come on back soon, and we will see you next video.